All right, I'm Cody Horton, Managing Director for Diverse Recruiting Experts. We help companies hire and attract diverse talent for their open roles. I'm thrilled today. I've got Ciera with me today, and she's with NAAAHR Baltimore. Ciera, let's have you talk a little bit about your background and about your organization.
Yeah, so my name is Ciera Parks. I am the Vice President of Program and Professional Development for NAAAHR, which is the National African American Association of HR Professionals in the Baltimore area. We have quite a few members and a very large following on our side. And the whole premise of the organization is to make sure that African American and Black HR professionals have the network they need to be coached, mentored, career opportunities, professional development opportunities, and to be exposed to different HR trends and coaching on. So in my personal life, I am an HR strategic coach, and that truly is based on my ability to come in, deliver results, assess talent, and develop the organization in a way that grows the business substantially.
That's fantastic. Well, Ciera, thank you very much. I'm really excited to talk with you today about modernizing the recruiting process to really help organizations transform their diversity and inclusion strategy and efforts. It's interesting because this week there's been a lot happening. I saw an article earlier in the week that was focused on, it said, hey, there's not enough talent, enough diverse talent to actually make the hires that need to be made. I recently saw that statement had been retracted and there was an apology issued. But this is a pretty common and a pretty fairly prevalent statement that, hey, there's not enough talent out there. And I personally think we need to stop blaming lack of diversity on the pipeline. Today, I know we're going to share some information that will help companies get past that excuse. But I just wanted to kick it off on your thoughts around, blaming the pipeline and, how do you go about increasing that pipeline of diverse talent?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, that is quite a common sentiment around diversity recruiting. And then right behind that are the diverse candidates that you're going to recruit qualified. And I think that's a very, very unfortunate statement to be making around diversity and recruitment. And it really is more about how your organization is prepared or positioned itself to attract and retain diverse candidates. And that truly is why people are seeing the struggle in their diversity, as opposed to saying the pipeline doesn't provide it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point that you're sharing. When you really kind of think about this pipeline issue that companies are dealing with, one of the things that I always come to is, how do you ensure that a company, let's say the company gets the pipeline, how do you ensure that you're actually able to make those diverse hires? Love to get
Yeah. So, there are a couple of things that happen. So in the traditional resource or sourcing recruitment process, right? There are some key steps that I think for diverse candidates you should be considering, right? And the first one is, what do the diverse employees that currently work for you say about the organization? Because if you have current employees who are in the market or are actively saying this is not a place where you feel comfortable, that is going to hurt your employer brand and ability to be able to attract other diverse candidates. Right behind that, it would be things like, what does your image say on online platforms, right? So places like PayScale, Indeed, those types of job boards that allow for employees or past employees to write about the organization. Another thing that you really want to consider when trying to source around this is, where are you visible in the community? But also, when we start to go to the offer stage with diverse candidates, are we talking about pay equity for our diverse candidates? And that's where I see a lot of applicants fall out, because they say you are not willing to pay diverse candidates what you are paying their peers who are non-diverse.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just having up-to-date information on what roles are paying, I think that's a really key point in making sure that companies are able to really work through what the existing market is and not paying, some archaic, because a lot of times by the time your compensation group gets the amount that a role is worth, the recruiters already know that, hey, the pipeline that we're working with, they're above that compensation range that you're dealing with. So I think you bring up a great point.
Absolutely. And then in addition to compensation, Cody, what are some tools, some technology opportunities that they could leverage for a greater impact for D&I?
Yeah, so in Modernize, there's always this reluctance with recruiting, especially the bigger your organization is, the harder it is to implement these changes. But where recruiting is going is using text, right? If your applicant tracking system isn't using text messages and you're not able to text that demographic or even just any candidate, you're missing out, right? So another place that you want to modernize is leveraging AI and video. Like video is now, I mean, overnight companies started doing video, right? You've said for years and years, hey, we can't work remote. Now all of a sudden everyone's remote and everyone's using some platform that allows them to have video. There are sourcing tools that allow you to use automation and AI to help the recruiter, to help the sourcer find great candidates. And they've got filters on those that allow you to focus on diverse talent. So you could use things like seek out, hire tool. There are a number of different tools that allow you to do that AI sourcing. You want to use tools that allow you to reach people in their social platforms. Facebook, everyone's on LinkedIn, but are you maximizing LinkedIn and the technology with LinkedIn? Being able to use Instagram as a recruiting tool, being able to work and make your profile look attractive so you actually draw more talent to the organization. So that's on the kind of how do you generate the talent, using things like virtual career fairs and virtual hiring events. Some companies are actually doing virtual hiring events using their existing Zoom or Google Chat or Microsoft Teams to do that interview. So those are some technologies that allow you to really kind of get those tools in place, leverage that pipeline that you're getting, and be able to evaluate some of those candidates.
That's a really good point. I have a question for you in regards to videos. So Cody, do you think that hiring managers and recruiters should be utilizing video early on in the process? I know some companies are doing that. Hey, thank you for your application. Go ahead and film this video, and then we'll decide to move forward with you. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, having the video gives a richer experience, right? It gives the candidate, once you get the candidate to the point that they are comfortable, right? So you have to explain to them, hey, look, you're going to do video. You're going to be talking to a camera. It's okay. A human being is going to be reviewing that video, but it gives them an opportunity to kind of showcase their communication skills, the ability to kind of process and make changes, and really to evolve, right? I mean, the key to success in the future is going to be how can people change and transform themselves so that they are in a more kind of current and modernized environment. So I think it's good to have video up front and to have video both two ways, right? Both the candidate as well as the hiring manager can do video. So the hiring teams can actually talk about their role, talk about their company, give more context to what it's like to work there, right? Be able to take advantage of the fact that the candidate's also going to be evaluating the company, and video is a great way to get the point across.
That's a really, really great idea, Cody. So I absolutely love the fact of having these preview videos, if you will, to be able to give applicants a realistic job preview of what they'll be doing, what their environment looks like, who their coworkers are, what their coworkers currently think of their position and the work that they're doing at the organization. But this is also a really great tool from an HR standpoint to be able to engage employees who are doing well at your organization currently, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm an employee who is a rock star and I see that you asked me to film this preview video for future applicants, it really does increase my buy-in for the organization and my level of recognition in the organization as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. When you think about just the processes and in the recruiting process and in the hiring process, what are some things that you can think about that would, help a company modernize their process?
Absolutely. So there are some real things that help with that, right? So the first one is the applicant tracking system itself, right? Is it user friendly enough for all people to be able to access, utilize, and get the best efforts out of? Something else that you would really want to consider before you even get to that point is your D&I strategy overall, right? So before you go to the up to plate to bat for any recruitment of diverse candidates as a strategy, you really should consider what is our goal in this, right? Are there numbers that we're looking to reach? What is our overall long haul goal for having diversity in our company? Do we have the infrastructure to support minorities and people of color, women, people with disabilities in our organization, right? And if you don't have it, even if you recruit all the diverse candidates you're looking to have, you're not going to keep them. So the organization has to be ready to respond to having diverse candidates actively participating in the workplace. And this is not just about we hired you. It's about, have you created affinity groups? Have you created opportunities for them to develop professionally? Have you built in coaches and mentors for them? Have you built in training plans that really do help them succeed in their role? And if you haven't done these things, you are going to continuously struggle with recruiting and retaining your diverse talent.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great, really kind of holistic view of kind of the talent ecosystem, really. You know, when I think about this, some of the things that I think about that companies need to get really good on the front end with the recruiting process is making sure that screening and interviewers are really qualified and able to evaluate talent in that process. And then getting the hiring managers and the leaders, as well as the recruiting team, involved in some of those debriefs from a consultative perspective from the recruiter's point of view. And some of that starts with just role clarity. I think that a company needs to use tools to help them when it comes to prioritizing what the role responsibilities are. There has to be that clarity, right? If this is one of the things that will help everyone along in the process, and it's identifying the must-haves for those roles, using some kind of thing like a multi-criteria decision-making model. I use one specifically. It's called the analytical hierarchy process, and it's good for about 10 different criteria. But beyond 10, you probably need to go to something else. But this is a model that allows you to prioritize and make sure that your selections on the priorities are consistent. Being able to share those must-haves will help you better evaluate and better assess the candidates. And because where candidates typically miss out, especially with diverse hiring, is it's the nice to haves that usually knock the candidates out if you're bringing people in. And so,
that is absolutely the case. And that's a really good point, Cody, because one of the things that you consider is when you have a panel, or even if it's just a one-on-one hiring process, when you have diverse candidates, if the people who are screening, the people who are interviewing are looking to say, I'm going to check every single box, they're not going to ever find a candidate, right? And then that severely limits the amount of diverse candidates you can bring in, saying that you are holding them perhaps to a different standard. I think another thing this brings up when we start sourcing or screening for diverse candidates is, are the people who are doing the interviewing trained on bias and unbiased, not unbiased conscience, right? Unconscious bias, I'm sorry. Because if they're not, right, you now have someone who is already tilting the table against your diverse candidates in the interviewing process. So that's really something that you should consider if you're looking to have a diverse candidate pipeline long term.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. And I think you touched on earlier the inclusion in the job descriptions and making sure that the job descriptions are inclusive. I'll touch on a couple of tools a little bit later, but you know, one of the things that I was trying to get a sense for is, you know, what should be considered in creating a roadmap to modernizing your recruiting, and how should companies, you know, measure success?
Yeah, so I think you have to be realistic first about what your company can handle, right? I think if you're saying that you want to be a 10% diverse company and right now you are at nearly zero, right? There are small leaps and bounds. You're not going to be able to develop this pipeline overnight. And you really don't want to grow so quickly that you end up losing the candidates that you do get. So a couple of things you would want to consider on the backside are there industries that you truly can go and tap into for this subset of the population? Are you looking in places where the candidates really should be? Are you considering the organization structure to say we are set up for that at all levels of the organization? And if the answer is no, the goals that you set initially should be realistic, even if they're low.
Yeah, goals, when you talk about goals, I think if you don't measure, you don't get the answer. So one of the things that I looked at is when you're setting goals, to your point about being realistic, make sure sometimes you set a range, right? You're like, here's the range that we're going to go. We know this is what the addressable market is. And so you can get that data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yep. You can get that, the census data. You can look at the demographics for your city. There are a number of sources that you could go and get that data so you can make an informed decision on how you're going to set the goals. And once you set the goals, it's key to just pick a few things that you're going to measure. I'd love to get your thoughts on post-recruiting, measurements that you look at. I wanted to share that on the recruiting side, what some of the things that you might want to look at is, hey, what does the time to hire look like? That's an outcome. So how long is it taking us to hire someone? Probably more important in this diversity sourcing space is what's the source of hire, right? What do the channels look like? Yep. How efficient and how effective are the channels and the sources that you're going to get candidates? And if you only have a few things to look at, sourcing channel effectiveness might be one, time to hire might be another one, pipeline might be another one, the diversity of your pipeline, because you have to start somewhere. And since we're talking about the top of the funnel, if you can't fill the funnel with diverse talent, you're not going to hire diverse talent. Absolutely. And so I think that's probably a place that you look, on the front end of the funnel. But I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what happens once you get people in the company.
Yeah, so one of the first things I will tell anyone when I'm doing training with them about retention, engagement at the organizational development, is truly your onboarding process, right? So if I have been hired at XYZ company, the expectation is that I have an offer letter, right, that truly represents the company in a great way. I have communication from either my hiring manager or the recruiter that is clear and professional. When I show up on my first day, right, the orientation is something that is amazing and represents the company well. A lot of times when you see turnover in your first 60 days, it is truly because the onboarding process was poor. And that's because you did not train them well. They did not have a mentor when they got there. They didn't know the questions to ask. There was no training plan. All those things make a candidate feel like they've made a bad choice. And there's no reason why a candidate would stick around anywhere past 2 months if the first 2 months have been horrible for them, right? People want to feel like they've made a really good decision about their employment, especially in these turbulent times. And organizations need to recognize that your training and onboarding methods matter.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Have you seen companies that there was a handoff from the recruiting process? So during the debrief, we know what candidates do well, but there are also places that you're bringing a candidate on and you're like, hey, we don't think they have this fully. So this is a skill that they can develop, or this is a competency that we need to develop and pay attention to, and maybe put that in the development plan. What's been your experience or seeing companies where that information got put into the onboarding process, or at least into the 30, 60, 90 day kind of ramp up plan?
Yeah, so there are two places where that works really well, right? One, that is truly a feature of a best places to work, because the organization has recognized that we've hired a person. When we were going through the interview process, we recognized perhaps there were some deficiencies in their entire skill set, but recognized that that wasn't enough not to hire the person, right? And in doing that, we know when we pass them along to the hiring manager that that person now has some gaps to fill. So in that way, your 30, 60, 90, I mean, to be honest, Cody, a lot of organizations aren't doing that, being completely transparent, right? And that's where the first fallout comes. Right behind that is the organization allowing for any professional development. Is there a tuition reimbursement program? Are they allowed to take any type of soft skills trainings or virtual webinars? Are you allowing your employees to have LinkedIn learning accounts that you pay for, right? If you're not doing those things, you cannot expect your employees to get better if they are always trying to tackle the fires that are in front of them and then trying to figure out, how do I close the gap on things that I can't do?
That's a great point. And that point that you just made is just a huge thing. That modernizes the recruiting process itself. You mentioned it's best in class. Just getting that information passed from the debrief for assessment for the candidate into the person's onboarding plan could make a huge difference in retention. So I really think that there's a lot of value in you sharing that. So
yeah. Cody, what are some thoughts on the pipeline, building the pipeline? You talked about the funnel itself, and if they weren't already in the funnel, they wouldn't make it through the pipeline.
Yeah. So when you think about getting the pipeline, the big thing about the pipeline is you've got to go and look for talent where they are, right? Where you've got to fish in the pools that the talent's going to be in. So some of the things that will help a company, and this is the low-hanging fruit, so you could go do this today, is put yourself as a recruiting leader or an HR leader or even a hiring manager in the shoes of a candidate, and just go and look at your company and figure out, what does our brand speak to the client or to the candidate? Do they see people like themselves on your website? Is your website accessible and easy to navigate? Will they see information about social justice and what your stance on diversity, inclusion, and equity and racism is? Do they see anything like that to give them a connection to you? So that kind of is low-hanging fruit. Once they start to look at the job descriptions, are your job descriptions inclusive, right? Have you used a tool like Talvista or Text.io or OnGig to really make sure that that job description reads inclusively? Because to your point earlier, women and people of color will opt out of a job if there's so many requirements and the job doesn't read inclusively and they don't feel like they're prepared for that job. And making sure that you're using so many resources that are out there. Diversity job sites like HBCU Connect is an amazing organization. They've been around for a long time. They connect with all the historically Black colleges and universities. They have a huge database of people. SWE, Society for Women Engineers, they have job posting sites. And I have a list of a bunch of organizations that you can actually post a job. The NASB website, National Society for Black Engineers, if you're looking for Black engineers, those are places that not only are you looking for the people who may be current members, but you're also looking for people who may be alumni and they graduated 10 years ago and they've got all these years of experience if you're looking for experienced hires. Prospanica, right? There's another organization that has Latinx professionals. There's so many organizations that are out there. So that's another lever that you can pull, is going out, actively sourcing talent from those organizations, posting jobs in their job sites. Those are other places that you can go to. And then hosting some of your own events. Just do an invitation only event, target people that you want to bring in virtual. Talk about saving money. If it's a digital opportunity now to get more candidates in front of your leaders. Like we talked about earlier with some of the video. But I'd say start with putting yourself in the candidate's shoes, be an active sourcer, and go find those organizations that allow you to build that pipeline.
That's a really great point. And then I'd also recommend a couple of other boards. Black in HR is another board that sources for HR professionals. And then, of course, NAAAH HR, right? That's another one. And I say those two specifically because if you are looking for other talent, who knows where to find talent better than people who are working in HR across all fields and industries, right? So if you post a job in one of these boards, and let's say it's for an accountant, if this person has an accountant in their network, they can easily refer you out and you continue to now build an organic pipeline. Yeah.
No, and you know what? The fact that you mentioned those two organizations, we should put our heads together and commit to sending out a list of some of the job boards and locations that people can post at. And so if you're open for it, I'm game. We can put that together and send it out.
Yeah, definitely. We can definitely send it out to the members registered on today's call.
Perfect.
Perfect. So,
Yeah.
so
And let me check real quick to see if there are any questions in the group. Hey, Jeff, do we have any questions?
Yeah, you've got what you just hit on, what's job boards to target diverse candidates. And I think the idea of sending out something would be great.
Perfect.
How do you make sure your interviewers are qualified?
And you want to take that one, Ciera?
Yes, yes. So I think sometimes organizations take interviewing too lightly. And they believe that if you have a manager or a hiring manager or a hiring lead in a role, they automatically are equipped because they perhaps know what the job function is. That is not the case, right? Sometimes you have leaders who are true process leaders and their assessment of people is way off the mark. And so if you have not spent time as an organization training your leaders, training your hiring managers to specifically target interviewing skills, skills to look for, questions unanswered, right? Holes or gaps in the applicant's resume or experience, you are doing your organization a disservice. Another thing you should really consider is, are you talking to your interviewers about bias? Are you talking to your interviewers about being very aware of what they're saying to the candidates that they're interviewing? Are you talking to your candidates to be able to speak on behalf of the organization about your diversity and recruitment efforts, about your social activism, about your stance on different social impacts, policies, things happening in the world? Because there is nothing worse than having a diverse candidate sit with a non-diverse hiring manager, ask a question about diversity, and have it shrugged away. There is nothing worse. You will automatically have candidates who say, this is not the organization that I want to be a part of. So all of that training is necessary.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I have a model that we use called Sparkle that helps you get past some of the things that you talked about. But I do think one of the points that you made is if interviewers are interviewing people, now that you've increased the pipeline of diverse talent and your interviewers are only used to interviewing a certain kind of demographic, now they've got this diverse pipeline of candidates in front that they may not have the same communication cadence or language or even background. It's easy for that bias to creep in. And so I think it's a great point that you make about making sure that you've covered the bias pieces, making sure those interviewers are strong interviewers. They understand how to do an interview. And so and they don't have their own special little question that they always ask candidates that really has nothing to do with the job or the company.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things that I see often is hiring managers or people who are doing interviews and they get a unique name on a resume, right? And instead of asking up front, hey, can you pronounce your name for me, right? They stammer through it or they avoid the name altogether and depersonalize the interview. And that is the number one thing, right? People want to hear their own name said back. And if you don't do that for a candidate who is diverse and already feeling like they're in an uphill battle, you've already ruled out the potential of a good relationship there.
Great, super. Jeff, is there another question that?
What can you do to verify that your sourcing strategy is working and reaching the candidates from the underrepresented groups?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that you need to do is you have to measure. We talked about measuring, right? So you may be measuring your channel efficiency, right? How effective is that channel that you've started to source in? Are you getting the results that you expected? Or is it the right profile that you're getting? That's one of the things that you can do. You can also look at, I think you have to think like a digital marketer or a marketing person. And being a production recruiter, I've never really loved marketing the way I love marketing today, because marketing wins the hearts and souls, right? Marketing takes someone who's a total stranger and turns them into a friend or someone who's knowledgeable or somebody who wants to buy your product or work in your company. I think you have to use the data from some of your recruitment marketing effort to understand if your messages are getting out to the candidates and resonating. I mean, certainly hires is always a great way to tell, but I think there are some indicators that will let you know if your strategy is working, and the faster you can get the data back, the faster you can make adjustments to what you're trying to do. Ciera, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think data is it, right? If you know you've set a goal for your recruitment strategy or your diverse pipeline, if you aren't hitting the numbers, then you aren't really reaching what you're looking to do here. Another one that I would say is just not about hitting the numbers and the quantity, but what does the experience look like once they're in the door? So if you are getting 100% of your goal with recruitment, but then turning over 100% of the people that you bring in, you are missing the mark altogether.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. Jeff, I think we'll take one more question if you've got one, Jeff.
Yep, Ken Button. A lot of times hiring managers look for the perfect candidate, ones that work for X company in a specific job or went to Y university. That can limit diversity in your pipeline. What advice do you have to get hiring managers to think more broadly and openly about the skills they need and not the pedigree of the candidate?
Yeah. Hey, Ciera. Hey, I think I know that Kent Button. Hey, a shout out to Kent. But Ciera, do you want to field that, and I'll chime in?
Yeah, so I would say if this is happening at your organization and your hiring managers truly do stick to this type of hiring model, what is your company's culture? Because it's obvious that this has been a practice that's been predicated time and time again to continue to bring in folks like this. Kent, you're absolutely correct. You will never be able to get diverse talent this way. And if so, it will be very far and few between. So in that situation, you need your senior leadership to demonstrate that this is not something that they value. Because if they're doing this, obviously that is the practice that they're showing. So I would say that senior leadership needs to encourage diverse hires. They need to encourage candidates who are not from Y university or haven't been poached from X company. That's another one. Poaching is the same way, right? If you are bringing over candidates from other organizations, you will continue to breathe the same type of environment. So your leadership really does have to stand firm on, we want different things, different universities, different people at our organization. Cody, what do you think about it?
Yeah, so this gets back to the really a little bit of kind of impact. If you're hiring for culture fit, let's say, that's a pretty common phrase. Hey, or they weren't a culture fit. Well, culture fit's just an excuse not to make the hire. So if you're hiring for culture fit, that kills your inclusion and diversity effort. The thing that I think hiring managers have to get their heads around is, how do you hire for competencies and values and skills and the behaviors that you're looking to see that makes a person a good member of a team, or that makes them someone who's going to be innovative and creative. You have to talk to those managers in language that they understand, especially if they're in a higher leadership role. And that is the language of impact, meaning how does this impact the sale or our sales organization if we're trying to hire people and we're trying to target a new demographic, right? Because the world is changing and leaders are getting in position who do come from more diverse backgrounds. And so if you can get into a new market, if you're a sales leader, because you hired someone with the background, they understand that market, I think that's key. Developing innovative products, right? If you've brought someone on and you make a hire and that person has a different background, but they help you create a product that's going to appeal to that demographic, that's critical. And I think the biggest thing to get managers to start to make some of these adjustments is to show them what it looks like, right? What does good look like? Because what happens is they only know what they know. What they don't know is, how do I go and make sure that I'm inclusive? How do I make sure that I'm sticking with the candidate? Taking them through a process using AHP or some other model that forces them to prioritize the must-haves will get you to the point where you can actually talk to them and show them the metrics, because AHP allows you, the analytical hierarchy process allows you to actually numerically show them the rankings of their priorities, and they don't argue, especially if it's a technical person. They're not going to argue about the numbers. Now, they may argue about the model, but they're not going to argue about the numbers and consistency and those things. And so you have to push. You just have to keep pushing them to try to do the things that are right and be more objective versus subjective, because they only know how to hire the people that they've hired. And you just have to push them to stick with the candidate with interviewer capability training and assessment and holding people accountable. So.
Absolutely.
Great.
Do we want to take another question from the chat or for the question box?
Yeah, we can do that. Just so you know, Ciera, Erica Broadwater's on. Wants to send greetings to everybody. She's the president of the organization.
Yes, yes. Thank you for tuning in, Erica.
Awesome.
So how do you talk about avoiding, or can you talk about avoiding reverse discrimination with diversity hiring efforts?
Go ahead, Cody.
I was going to say, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, right? In my experience, I think the reverse racism in hiring is not happening as often as people are alluding to it actually happening, right? And so in that space, I think if you are building an organization that is truly inclusive from top to bottom, this doesn't happen on either side. You bring in candidates, you say that you have targeted potentially diverse candidates. And in that way, if they are qualified, if they interview well, if they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities and competencies for the role, you hire them. But I think this is what happens when you have this reverse racism, right? In your hiring practices, when you're hiring leaders or your recruitment people are not educated in what the true scope of the job is. Because this should never be an issue if you are assessing them based on their true talent and the talent pool or the candidate pool of diverse candidates is available. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, so I think that also you have to look at what are you trying to accomplish, right? If your company says, hey, we've got a gap in African-American leadership, we're going to put focus into that. And it's fine to do that work. It's not reverse discrimination if you are proactively sourcing for African-American talent or Latinx talent or women talent or any demographic, because you've got a gap. You're trying to make sure that your existing workforce reflects the population. And in many cases, the existing workforce doesn't reflect the population. In fact, I'm not an attorney, but I will tell you that if you have equally qualified candidates, and those candidates have, they meet all the requirements, and one candidate is from a diverse demographic and fits into the plan that you're trying to, or the goal that you're trying to reach, and another candidate does, you can use that diverse candidate and you can select that candidate because it's part of the effort that you're making. And so it's not reverse discrimination or reverse racism or whatever you want to call it, to intentionally source and screen diverse candidates. You want to provide a diverse slate of talent and you want to give everybody an opportunity, but you're not creating a reverse discrimination scenario by doing that. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but that's definitely a common question that comes up frequently.
Yeah, I think you hit that spot on, right? You put the emphasis where you want the emphasis to be. And if your organization stands behind having the talent in your organization, there really isn't an issue otherwise.
Yeah, there is this makes me think about accountability, right? So it's great to have a diversity recruiting opportunity, a diversity recruiting strategy. If we modernize our recruiting efforts so that it impacts our D&I efforts, the key here is you've got to have accountability in there. And I'm not saying some huge accountability plan, but hold people accountable. If you've got a recruiting leader, don't put all the pressure on the recruiting leader to diversify the workforce. You've got to hold the hiring teams accountable. You've got to hold the executive leadership teams accountable. And it's because it's a team effort and everyone should be accountable. And the goals that you set are ones that you should kind of stick to. And, having said all that, Ciera, what are some things that you could think of that would help a company hold people accountable in this space?
So, you hit it right on the head with that one, Cody, right? So If you have a recruiter who is bought into diversity recruiting, or you have a recruiter who is solely focused on diversity efforts, even better, right? So you have a diversity recruiter or someone who is actively sourcing in that way. And then you turn around and you say, hey, hiring manager, I want to be very clear with you that your team does not represent the population. You have to say that to your hiring manager or to the director or to the manager of that department. Once you can clearly establish that, you need to be accountable to saying, hey, manager, in this predicament, what are you doing about this? So you have candidates who come in who are diverse and you are actively not hiring them. Can you tell me why that is? Is there a bias? Is it because you truly feel like they're not qualified? Are you not assessing talent of diverse candidates the same way you are assessing candidates' applications or skills for non-diverse talent? And that has to be a very honest conversation. And you have to be able to really hold their feet to the fire if they do demonstrate bias. Right behind that, we're going to talk about infrastructure of the organization. If the organization is not set up to support diverse candidates, it doesn't matter what happens, you will not be successful and they will not stay. And so that is truly the secondary and tertiary levels of accountability in the organization for retaining, attracting, and recruiting diverse talent.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you definitely sharing that. You know, part of, we touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to get your thoughts in a little deeper. So we've gone out, we've got a pipeline, the people have come in. What are you finding helps reduce some of that bias, some of that I'm hiring for culture fit? I listened to, or I read an article the other day where some recruiting professional said, oh, culture fit is the #1 thing you have to hire for. I think that's a bunch of BS because that is not the #1 thing. You're hiring for values, you're hiring for behaviors and all of those things. So how do you find that you can help reduce bias and companies can better evaluate candidates in this whole recruiting process?
Yeah, so I think right now an organization should truly be stepping back to assess not just their recruiting strategy, but the overall organizational mission and values. That truly is where it starts now. So is the organization doing anything with everything that's happening in the world to recognize the social activism, the injustice? Are they doing anything to train their people to speak about what the company is doing to combat what's happening out in the world and make sure it doesn't happen within their doors? Is the organization creating policies that are anti-discriminatory, anti-harassment, EEO compliant? If the organization isn't doing that, it's going to be very tough for them to say that they truly do stand on a platform that would grow, limit the bias of their leaders. I think this is the time in today's climate where we should truly be spending the money on diversity training, spending the money on bias training, spending the money on development, integration techniques as far as you going out, having your leaders go out and interact in communities that don't look like them, volunteering in spaces, being active in politics that further social activism. And if they're not doing those things, how do they expect to drive down bias in the hiring? I couldn't imagine what that would look like otherwise.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. In some companies, every company's got a different appetite for how far they're willing to go.
Mm-hmm.
But what you talked about are kind of the basics, right? A modern recruiting function would take these things into consideration and really lean in on ensuring the unconscious bias pieces are there, that interviewers' capability is there, getting input from diverse candidates that you've hired recently or ones that have been in the company for a while, and being able to structure those interviews and give people practice, right? One of the things that you can do is actually use the technology to record practice interview sessions, mock interviews. I know everybody rolls their eyes when you say, oh, you got to role play and you got to do a mock interview. But there's a lot of power in role playing and recording and giving feedback to the interviewer, because the only way to get better is to get the feedback. And so I think that's one of the things that as a takeaway that people could start to do. And no one can say they have an excuse because you're all on Zoom and we record these all the time. And so I think that's a great way to look at that.
Something else that you can do is actually have either the recruiter or some of your HR folk sit in and shadow interviews. I have personally done that, right? Sat in the back of the room and assessed the interaction with the hiring manager or the recruiter to see how the interaction goes. And what you will be astonished by is that there are some times where you notice when a candidate comes in and looks just like the recruiter, there is an ease of conversation. There is a definite preference in having conversation with this person. And then they're more likely to mark this person as a hire. And then you watch either a diverse candidate, person of color, or woman come in. And then what you have there is a discomfort in conversation, right? And then what ends up happening, right? I hire someone who I like, someone who reminds me of myself, and I don't hire the diverse candidate.
Yeah, I always tell managers, don't try to hire yourself. And that's exactly what people end up doing. No, it's a great point. Let me go to questions real quick. Jeff, is there anything here? Any other questions in here in the group?
Yes, we have. Do you have an opinion on standardized testing with regards to diverse hiring? Do you see standardized testing as a potential barrier to diverse hiring efforts?
Ciera, you want to tackle that one?
I personally am not in favor of any type of standardized testing in regards to hiring. I think that there are some personality assessments that you can use that really demonstrate a slight towards being non-biased. Those do exist. But if you're going to do any type of testing where bias has clearly been demonstrated in the way they calculate their results, I would say that's not a fit for a good diverse population or pipeline.
Yeah, I think with the standardized tests, you just have to make sure that they've been vetted to make sure that they don't have some adverse impact. What I would say is more appropriate would be, certainly if you're using a standardized test, it shouldn't be used as part of the hiring decision, but it's part of a development plan that goes into somebody that gets hired. Where testing is appropriate and skills-based interviewing is appropriate is if you have a job and it's a software developer job, then certainly by all means give people specific examples that'll specific actions that'll allow you to evaluate their skill in that area. I think those are places that and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Ciera, but I think you can do that skills-based work. It's just the standardized tests are a little bit problematic depending on the demographic.
Skills-based testing, absolutely love it, completely fine. But other types of testing, aptitude testing, I've seen some organizations do testing that truly measure people's reading competency levels or math competency levels, and they truly had no bearing thereafter on their job. And I can tell you, when I go in and I consult with organizations on this, stereotypically, right, what you see is that candidates who don't have English as their first language struggle and don't do well on these tests. Students who were raised or grew up in another country, right, don't do well on these tests. And so now you end up weeding out diverse talent for things that truly are not going to impact their day-to-day function on the job.
Yeah, no, great point. Jeff, I know I want to be cognizant of the time. Is there another, I think we can take one more question and then we'll go to some of the final.
Yeah, so I've already posted in the group that if we do not cover a particular question, we will get the answers out to them. So they'll still get those responses. What are your thoughts on how important retention is as regards to diverse talent?
Yeah, a lot of times it's easy to go straight to recruiting when something comes up around diversity, but retention, I think retention starts with recruiting. So retention of the people that have come in and your existing workforce is critical because you've got to be able to keep people, right? You never get any net adds in the company if you're bringing them in and they're leaving twice as fast. And so retention is so critical. Ciera, I'd love to get your thoughts on the retention question.
Yeah, so for me, for diverse candidates, I mean, really and truly in any employee engagement situation, but specifically for diverse candidates, if your diverse candidates are running out the door team, you are losing, right? You are not doing what you need to. And you really have to step back and say, what are we not doing as an organization, right? Whenever we run any type of retention statistics, engagement statistics, employee survey results, you always want to break down your data by demographic. So people of color, women, age, all of those things to make sure that you have accounted for where the turnover really is happening, and then drill down into why it's happening that way. If all of your Black employees are leaving, if all of your female employees are leaving, what is the problem? Are there harassment incidences in the place, right? Are there ER issues? Are you not building an inclusive environment? Are people being excluded on work projects? People not being valued in the workplace? You are doing something to drive people away, and leadership has to say, this is not about recruitment. This is about the environment and the culture we're creating at the company.
No, it's great. So I know we're close to time. One of the things that I was hoping to close with is just to get your thoughts on, you know, a few things that people can go out and take action on today, right? They can walk away and they can say, I'm going to take these steps to modernize my recruiting efforts so that it impacts, so that it really helps us transform our diversity and inclusion strategy.
Yeah, so a couple of things in that space. The first one is I want to make sure that the organization has assessed that they are genuinely ready for this shift in their retention and recruitment plan. That's the first thing, right? Disingenuous retention, disingenuous recruitment strategies don't work, and they're going to just make people upset thereafter if they do come into the company. So that's the first thing. What is the true commitment that you are willing to make to recruitment efforts for diverse candidates? Behind that, I would say, are you reaching out to the right organizations? So are there community activist groups? Are there organizations in your area like NAAAHR, Black in HR, organizations like NSBE, right? Organizations that you can truly reach out to and say, I want to build a genuine relationship with for a sustainable pipeline. Next, I want you to consider what your social media looks like. If your Indeed, your pay scales, your company ratings, job boards, all say things that are disparaging about your organization in relation to diverse candidates or diverse employees, you are already behind the 8 ball, and you need to do your due diligence to make sure you are able to retain the employees you do bring in. Behind that, I would say that you need to look at what type of infrastructure is currently developed in your organization. Are there affinity groups there? Do you have a welcoming committee? Do you have some type of informal social networks? What are the things that will make a person who comes into your organization immediately feel included where they are not the majority?
No, I think it's great. That's great. You know, the things that I would highlight from the recruiter, really thinking about from a technical perspective. One, put yourself in the shoes of a candidate who engages with your brand. And so go to your website, look at the job posting, try to apply to the job, and go to the social media sites that Ciera talked about. Put yourself in those shoes, because that's going to help you think. Use Google Trends or Bing or any of the tools that you might use to find out how are words trending for these roles that we're posting. The biggest thing is to be intentional, right? Take a stand and be intentional about standing up for what you're trying to stand up for, and that's to diversify the workforce. And then leverage the technology. We talked about AI. We talked about all kinds of other technology, video. You can be on TikTok. You can be on Snapchat. You can be on any of these, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. LinkedIn has lots of capabilities that we didn't even cover today.
Right, yeah.
But leverage that technology. And then the best thing for you to do once you get the pipeline is to improve that interviewer capability and their ability to assess the talent for those hiring managers. To that question that Kent asked earlier, that is the biggest blocker to a diverse pipeline of candidates. Because if your team goes out and they either find the candidates or they engage a company, an agency to help them, or consultants to help them, and you get the candidates in play, if you can't get them through the interview process and success, you're just wasting time, and you're impacting your brand, because they're going to go out and say, oh, they're not serious, right?
Yep,
So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Cody, I'd like to interrupt here real quick. Erica has asked to shout out something. You guys open to take her call?
Yeah, who's shouting out?
Erica
Erica.
Broadwater.
Oh yeah, oh definitely, yeah, for sure.
All right, she should be ready.
Yes, indeed. So Jeff, thank you very much for allowing me to just share my heart with all of you. As the national president for the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources, I must say, Ciera and Cody, I tip my hat to you. This is necessary conversation to have. I have led talent acquisition for over 27 years nationally and globally, and I tell you, we have to do better. Right? So some of the key takeaways that this audience must listen and hear is not just the technology, it's not just the networking. It really is, as Cody mentioned, being intentional, right? And diversifying your talent pipeline. Without that, it's really noise. And what does good look like? Well, your brand is what good looks like. And if, to Ciera's point, if you're not looking for and being intentional about that talent and diversifying your pipeline, then it really is for naught. So I encourage this conversation to continue. Let this not be the last time you have opportunity to speak on this very subject. It's beyond a movement, it's a necessity. And as we continue to elevate minorities into the workplace, into leadership roles, all the way up to the C-suite and sitting on boards, this is where the conversation must start, is that talent pipeline. So I applaud the effort, and I thank you for, Jeff, thank you for letting me just speak in here, and great job, guys. Very impressed.
Erica, really appreciate you jumping on. I'm so happy to have you. Ciera's been amazing getting prepped for this. I know NAAAH HR is doing some fantastic work, and I certainly look forward to us having an opportunity to really progress this conversation in a meaningful way to impact everyone.
Great, you have my support, and thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank Ciera for coming on. I want to thank all the participants. Thank you and appreciate everything you do. Any questions, definitely feel free to reach out. We'll get that list that Ciera and I promised that we'd get to you, and we'll answer any additional questions that are in there. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.